Some places are never meant to be forgotten. Not because of what can be seen, but because of what was buried, unheard, and left to cry in the dark. In Ban Nong Kham, there was a cemetery with no name. No gates, no records, only whispers. And every night, after midnight, a sound rose from the earth. The cry of a newborn who was never allowed to live. This is not a story about monsters. This is a story about silence. And what happens when that silence is broken? Chapter 1. The Nameless Cemetery. The cemetery lay on the western edge of Ban Nong Kham village, where the red dirt road ended abruptly amid wild reeds and aging rubber trees. There was no gate, no fence, not even a rotting wooden sign to mark its existence. On official maps, the place appeared as a blank space, as if it had never existed at all. But to the villagers, it was painfully real, so real that no one dared to call it by name. They referred to it only in whispers, that place. By day, the cemetery looked like abandoned land. Wild grass grew knee-high, tangled with thorny bushes sharp as blades. Old grave markers leaned at crooked angles, their inscriptions so eroded that no names could be read. Many graves had no markers at all, only a dry wooden branch stuck into the soil, tied with a faded red string. No one knew who lay beneath them, how they died, or even whether what was buried there was truly human. But when the sun went down, the place changed. The wind around the cemetery always blew against the direction of the village breeze. The air felt colder, heavier, carrying the damp smell of ancient soil mixed with a faint metallic tang. Like blood long dried, birds never flew over it after dusk. Dogs and cats that wandered too close would lower their tails, growl, and flee, even though nothing visible stood in their way. And then, the crying began. No one could remember exactly which night they first heard it, only that at some point, after midnight, in the absolute stillness of the countryside, a thin, fragile sound rose from the direction of the cemetery. It was the cry of a newborn infant, trembling, broken, drawn out, as if tiny lungs were struggling to pull in their last breath. The cry did not sound like that of a living child. It was not sharp or loud, but hoarse and muffled, as though squeezed through a throat filled with earth. Sometimes it seemed to come from deep underground. Other times it felt so close that listeners believed something was standing just behind them. The most terrifying thing was this. No baby in the village was crying at that hour. Whenever the sound appeared, Ban Nong Kham fell into silence. Lights inside houses went out earlier than usual. Windows were shut tight. Adults pulled their children close, covered their ears, and whispered old prayers passed down through generations. No one stepped outside. No one looked toward the cemetery. Because the elders believed one thing above all else. If someone listened to the crying for too long, whatever was crying would know it had been heard. And once it knew, it would never stop. Chapter 2. The First Cry. The first person who dared to admit that he had clearly heard the crying was Somchai, the oldest night watchman in Ban Nong Kham. He had done the job for over 20 years and was no stranger to venomous snakes, petty thieves, or sudden deaths in the rubber forest. Somchai used to say that if there was anything in this world that frightened him, it was not the living. That night, rain was falling. The downpour was heavy, soaking the red dirt road until it released the raw smell of mud. Somchai wore his old raincoat, a flashlight clenched in his hand, walking slowly along the edge of the village, close to 2 in the morning, just as he reached the stretch of road opposite the Nameless cemetery. The rain stopped. Not gradually. It was cut off abruptly, as if someone had switched off the sky. The wind died. Insects vanished. The silence became so unnatural that Somchai could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his chest. Then the crying began. At first it was faint, almost blending with the sound of water dripping from leaves. Within seconds, it grew clearer, long, trembling, exhausted, like a newborn who had just entered the world but found no one waiting to hold it. The sound came from the cemetery. It was not shrill, not frantic, but hoarse and strained, as if the child were crying with its last breath. Somchai froze. He swept his flashlight beam ahead. The weak light sliced through a thin veil of mist rising from the ground. There was no one there. No human shape. Only old graves emerged and disappeared in the flickering glow. The crying did not stop. It did not rise and fall like the cry of a hungry baby. Nor did it sound panicked. It was steady, relentless, dragging on, as if the thing crying had already cried for a very long time and no longer had the strength to scream. Each broken sob sent a chill crawling up Sanchai's spine. He wanted to turn and run, but his legs would not move. In that moment, Sanchai realized something that made the blood in his veins turn cold. The crying did not come from a single place. 1 second it echoed from deep within the cemetery. The next, it seemed to rise from directly beneath his feet, seeping up through the cold, damp earth. Then he heard it. 2 rhythms overlapping. One was weak and infantile. The other was lower, rougher, like a distorted echo of the first. Muttering prayers under his breath, Sanchai tightened his grip on the flashlight until his knuckles turned white. When he finally squeezed his eyes shut, unable to endure it any longer, the crying stopped. The silence returned too quickly. It was so sudden that Sanchai nearly collapsed. The next morning, he did not leave his house. He burned with fever, drifting in and out of delirium, whispering words no one could understand. When the village head came to ask what had happened, Sanchai spoke only once, his voice cracked and hoarse. That child was not born the right way. That afternoon, Sanchai handed in the keys to his night watch post. He never walked the road near the cemetery again, but from that night on, more people began to hear the crying, and the nameless cemetery had awakened.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Rumor of the Buried Child. In Ban Nong Kham, people did not make a habit of asking too many questions about the past. What had happened, they believed, should be left beneath the soil, just like the nameless graves in the cemetery. But after the night Sanchai heard the crying, the things long buried began to seep back up, slowly and persistently, like the stench of damp earth after rain. The rumor first surfaced among the elders. They whispered to one another at the morning market, while sorting vegetables or weighing rice, their voices so low they nearly blended into the wind. Some said that many years ago, so long ago no one dared name the date, a newborn child had been buried alive. The baby was never registered, never given a name, never allowed to see daylight more than once. It was the result of a relationship deemed cursed, perhaps between a villager and a stranger. Or worse, between people who were never meant to have a child together. The mother gave birth in secrecy. No one knew exactly who she was. In those days, Ban Nong Kham was small, houses scattered far apart, and women sometimes disappeared for a few days only to return as if nothing had happened. But the child was never seen again. Some claimed they had witnessed a shadowy figure wrapped in a dark cloak, carrying something very small, walking toward the cemetery on a night of heavy rain. Others said they had heard frantic digging beneath the thunder, as if someone were terrified and unable to dig deep enough. What made the rumor truly terrifying was not the story itself, but how closely reality began to match it. Since the crying started, the ground in the cemetery had begun to change. Several graves sank visibly, as though something beneath them was shifting. The soil remained soft even without rain. Grass growing in those areas turned yellow and twisted, drained of life as if something underneath were feeding on it. Animals reacted first. Dogs in the village refused to approach the cemetery, whining and growling as if facing an unseen threat. One old dog barked toward the cemetery for 3 consecutive nights. On the 4th night, it was found dead, its mouth frozen open as if mid-howl. Chickens stopped laying eggs. Buffaloes grew restless, refusing to enter their pens after sunset. Then the children began having the same dreams. They woke up screaming, their backs soaked with sweat, saying there was a baby who was very cold, crawling beneath the floorboards. One child insisted that someone had called to him from under his bed. A tiny hoarse voice asking to sleep beside him. Parents burned incense all night in terror. But the crying continued to drift in from the cemetery, steady and unyielding. The elders began speaking of a forbidden belief. The spirit of a buried infant is not like other ghosts. They said such spirits did not know they were dead. They only knew they had been abandoned, pushed into darkness before they could understand what was happening. The crying was not meant to frighten the living, it was instinctive. A desperate call for comfort from something that had never been held. An old blind woman murmured during a fevered trance. "It's not crying because it hurts, it's crying because it's cold." From that night on, no one in Ban Nong Kham dared walk past the cemetery after sunset. But no matter how much they avoided it, the crying grew clearer each night, as if whatever lay beneath the soil was slowly drawing closer to the surface. And the most terrifying thought of all was this: no one was certain there was only one child buried there. Chapter 4. The Mother in the Dream. Nok arrived in Ban Nong Kham at the beginning of the rainy season, when the sky was perpetually gray and the air hung heavy with the smell of wet earth. She was a young nurse newly assigned to the village clinic, carrying an old suitcase and a simple belief that ghost stories were nothing more than fear passed down through generations. Nok was not born here. She had not grown up with whispers about the nameless cemetery. To her, those stories sounded exaggerated, products of isolation and superstition. For the first few nights, she slept well. Until the fourth night, she dreamed she was standing in the cemetery. There was no wind, no insects. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and sickly, like a dying lantern. In front of her stood a woman dressed in an old white blouse, the fabric stained gray with mud. Her long hair was tangled and matted, covering most of her face. In her arms, she cradled a newborn wrapped tightly in a dark red cloth. The baby was crying. The sound in the dream was exactly the same as the crying people described: hoarse, weak, broken, as if its tiny lungs were filled with soil. But what made Nok's blood run cold was this: the baby's mouth was not moving. The crying came from a deep shadow where its face should have been. The woman slowly raised her head. Her face was blurred, as if washed away by rain, but her eyes were clear, sunken, bloodshot, staring unblinking at Nok. "Give him back to me." The voice did not come from the woman's mouth. It came from everywhere at once. Nok jolted awake, her heart pounding, cold sweat soaking through her clothes. The clinic room was dark. The clock on the wall read exactly 3 in the morning. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was only a nightmare brought on by listening to too many frightening stories. Then she lifted her hands to her face. Her fingertips were coated with damp soil. The next morning, Nok noticed dried mud beneath her fingernails, even though she was certain she had not gone outside during the night. Her shoes were still by the bed. The window was locked, the door bolted from the inside. The dream returned the following night. This time, the woman did not stand still. She knelt on the ground and began digging with her bare hands. Dirt packed under her fingernails, smeared across her face and clothes. But she did not stop. The baby in her arms cried louder, the sound urgent, pressing, as if urging her to hurry. When the hole was deep enough, the woman placed the baby inside. Her hands trembled. She did not look back as she shoveled the earth over it, fast and clumsy, as if terrified someone might see. Nok tried to scream, tried to run, but her legs would not move. Just before the soil completely covered the baby, it turned toward her. From the darkness where its face should have been, a thin, fragile voice whispered clearly, "Mother, I'm cold." Nok woke up to the sound of crying. Not in her dream. The crying came from outside the clinic. Very close, so close she could hear each broken breath. Trembling, Nok stepped to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Under the dim street light, in front of the clinic, tiny footprints were pressed into the damp ground. They led away from the building, straight toward the nameless cemetery. That night, Nok understood she was no longer an outsider. And whatever was crying beneath the earth had begun to come looking for her.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Small Footprints. The next morning, Ban Nong Kham woke to a vague sense of unease, as if something had passed through the village during the night without making a sound. Nok was the first to step out of the clinic. She stood frozen in the yard, staring at the tiny footprints scattered across the ground, still damp with dew. They were far too small to belong to a child who could walk. Each print was no bigger than half an adult's palm. The toes were faint, the heel barely visible, as though whatever had left them had never fully pressed its weight onto the earth. Stranger still, the footprints were not random. They formed neat lines, leading away from the nameless cemetery, crossing the dirt road, and entering the heart of the village. As the sun rose higher, villagers began discovering the same footprints in front of their own homes. On the porch of the village head, along the side of the rice seller's house, beneath the bedroom windows of families with pregnant women, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks. The footprints simply appeared, lingered, and then stopped, like something had stood there quietly, listening, watching, before moving on. One man swore he had washed his yard thoroughly the night before. Yet in the morning, the footprints were still there, pressed deep into the soil, unmoved even after he poured water over them again. Another villager scattered ash across his walkway to see if anything else would appear. By morning, the ash had been disturbed, but no adult footprints mixed in. Only the tiny ones. That night, no one slept. The crying began earlier than usual. Just as dusk settled, it no longer drifted from the cemetery alone. It slipped into houses through cracks beneath doors, through thin wooden walls. Some heard it from beneath their beds. Others heard it in their bathrooms, echoing up from the drains, wet and hollow. The children cried along with it. They woke screaming, pointing into the darkness of their rooms, saying there was a baby standing there, silent except for its crying. One child whispered that the baby wanted to be held, his voice no longer sounding like his own. Nock began to notice a terrifying pattern. The footprints did not appear at random. They stopped only in front of houses belonging to those who had once rejected a life. Directly or indirectly, someone who had forced a daughter to end a pregnancy. Someone who had turned away after hearing a baby cry on a rainy night years ago. Someone who had known the truth and chosen silence. The Nameless cemetery had not created the crying. It was returning what had been buried. On the third night after the footprints appeared, Nock heard a knock at the clinic door. Soft, even, like a small hand tapping on wood. When she opened the door, no one stood outside, only a tiny handprint smeared with wet soil on the door panel, icy to the touch. And behind her, in the darkened room, the crying rose again, very close. This time, Nock clearly heard a whisper woven into the sobbing. "Don't leave me." The village descended into panic. But that was only the beginning. Chapter 6. The Child That Was Never Born. There was no longer any room for denial in Ban Nong Kham. The tiny footprints, the crying that seeped into every corner of the village, the identical dreams haunting different people, everything had gone far beyond the reach of reason. At last, the village head agreed to summon the oldest shaman in the region. A man who lived in isolation on the northern hillside and appeared only when something occurred that humans could no longer resolve on their own. The shaman's name was Prasit. He arrived one gloomy afternoon, carrying a worn brown cloth bag filled with talismans, bronze bells, and animal bones yellowed with age. The moment his feet touched the soil of Ban Nong Kham, he stopped, closed his eyes, and stood motionless for a long time, as if listening to something no one else could hear. "It's crying more now," he said at last, his voice rough. "And it's running out of patience." When he was led to the edge of the Nameless cemetery, Prasid did not step inside right away. He planted a stick of incense into the ground. The flame flickered once, then died instantly, as if the air itself had been drained of breath. His expression darkened. "This place doesn't hold just one infant spirit," Prasid said quietly. "It holds a void, created by many acts of refusing life. These are not ghosts in the usual sense," he continued. "They are beings who were never acknowledged as having lived. No names, no funerals, no memories to cling to." Nock stood beside him, a chill spreading from her feet up into her chest. She remembered the dreams, the woman digging with bare hands, the faceless baby wrapped in red cloth. When Nock told Prasid everything she had seen, he studied her for a long moment, his eyes filled with both pity and caution. "They chose you," he said, "because you have touched new life before. You hear their crying because you understand what it means." That night, Prasid performed a small ritual meant to listen rather than suppress. He drew a circle of ash and salt at the cemetery's edge and hung a bronze bell from a dead tree branch. When the ritual began, the wind reversed direction, making the bell ring without anyone touching it. The crying rose. This time it was no longer distant. It surged in overlapping waves. Many infant voices crying from the same confined space. Prasit knelt, listening, and then his hands began to tremble. Not one, he whispered. It was never just one. According to the shaman, Ban Nong Kam had buried more than bodies over the years. Premature babies left to die. Fetuses forcibly aborted and hastily buried. Infants who died shortly after birth and were denied proper rites for fear of bad luck. All of them had been pushed into the same place, as if covering them with soil would erase the sin. But the earth remembered. When the ritual ended, the crying did not stop. It changed. It grew heavier, more resentful. Prasid warned that unless the village held a great rite to acknowledge the existence of the children, they would never leave. And once they stopped begging, they would begin to take. Nok realized then that no one in the village remained untouched by what was happening, because the child that was never born was already trying to rise to the surface.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The night the grave was dug. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood that the shaman's small ritual had failed. The crying did not fade. It grew clearer, closer, as if whatever lay beneath the ground had realized it was being noticed. Fear slowly turned into suffocating pressure. And under that pressure, people reached for the simplest solution they could imagine: see the truth with their own eyes. The idea of digging up a grave came from the younger men in the village. They believed that uncertainty was the real source of terror. If they knew exactly what lay beneath the soil, they could deal with it. They did not fully trust the shaman's words, nor dreams or invisible cries. They trusted only what could be touched, what could be seen. That night, 6 men carried shovels and hoes into the Nameless cemetery. Nok watched from a distance, her heart pounding. She wanted to stop them, to warn them, but her throat locked tight. Prasit had warned them clearly. To dig was not to seek answers, it was to disturb. But no one had the patience left to listen. They chose an old grave set slightly apart from the others. It had no marker, only a decayed wooden branch stuck into the ground. The soil around it was unnaturally soft. The first strike of the shovel sank deep, releasing a wet, heavy sound, like flesh being torn open. The deeper they dug, the colder the air became. Not the chill of night, but a cold that rose from the ground itself, turning breath into faint mist. One man's hands began to shake. He said he could hear a baby crying right beside his ear, though the others heard nothing. Then the shovel struck something solid. They widened the hole, uncovering a small wooden coffin, far smaller than any meant for an adult. The wood was rotten, split open in places. No one dared open it at first. After a long moment, one man knelt down and brushed the dirt from the lid with his bare hands. The smell burst out instantly. It was not the stench of decay, but a thick, sickly sweetness, like old blood trapped too long in a sealed space. One man gagged. Another stumbled backward, but it was already too late. The coffin lid collapsed. Inside were no adult bones, no burial clothes, only a bundle of dark red cloth, soaked with soil and blackened fluid. When the cloth was pulled back, a tiny shape lay curled inside. A newborn's head. Its skin had turned gray-black, shriveled tight. There was no body attached. Its mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, frozen in a silent scream. The eye sockets were deep and hollow, yet from within them, the crying rang out clearly. No one screamed. The horror was too overwhelming for that. The crying did not come from the throat alone. It echoed from the coffin, from the soil, from the air itself. Flashlights flickered violently. One man collapsed into the mud, clutching his head, whispering pleas for forgiveness. Then they heard something else. The sound of the earth moving. From the surrounding graves, the ground trembled softly, as if something beneath was shifting. Awakening, more cries rose, near and far, layered over one another. There was no doubt anymore. The grave they had opened was only one of many. They fled in blind panic, abandoning the open pit, the small coffin, and the relentless crying behind them. As they ran, one man swore he saw tiny hands pushing up from the edge of the hole, clutching at the soil, trying to pull themselves free. By morning, the pit was gone. The earth had closed over itself, smooth and undisturbed, as if no one had ever dug there. But from that night on, the crying was no longer just the sound of an infant. It carried something else. Anger. Chapter 8. The crying spreads. After the night the grave was dug, Ban Nong Kam could no longer tell where the cemetery ended and where the village began. The crying no longer drifted from a distance, no longer arrived only on the wind or along the paths leading to the outskirts. It was everywhere, as if the village itself had become part of the nameless cemetery. On the first night, the crying came from inside houses. A woman washing dishes heard a faint sound behind her, rising from an old water jar. When she bent to look, the surface of the water rippled in perfect circles, and the crying echoed from the bottom, low and muffled, as if filtered through layers of soil. She collapsed on the spot, unable to scream, tears streaming endlessly down her face. The next night, a man heard the crying in his bathroom. The sound came from the drain, sometimes near, sometimes far, as if something were crawling through the narrow pipes, dragging its weak breath along. When he smashed open the drain cover in panic, only damp air rushed up to meet him. The crying did not grow louder. It grew more numerous. People began hearing it even when they were completely alone. In the quietest moments, some felt their mattress sink, as though a small weight had been placed beside them, and then the crying rose right next to their ear, wet and cold. Others heard it weave into their prayers, disrupting the rhythm, until they could no longer continue. Those who listened for too long began to change. They grew distracted, easily startled, their eyes fixed on things no one else could see. Some whispered that they heard familiar voices calling them by intimate names: mother, father, grandmother. Strangely, those who had never had children reacted the most violently, denying what they heard, smashing objects in their homes as if trying to drive something unseen away. Nok felt the spread more keenly than anyone. She heard the crying even when the clinic was full. It did not drown out conversation, it lingered beneath it, a constant pressure against her ears. At times, she felt the sound was waiting for her to respond, and when she did not, it grew heavier, more insistent. Children began avoiding adults. They said the grown-ups smelled like dirt, and that other children were clinging to their legs, refusing to let go. One child drew crude pictures on the floor, small pits with black circles inside. When asked what they were, the child answered simply, "The baby's bed." When Prasid returned to the cemetery one afternoon, he stopped before entering. He said the place was no longer a single location. Whatever was crying had attached itself to memory, to guilt, to those who had been involved, even through silence alone. "They've been awakened," Prasid said, "and now they want to be seen." That night, the crying merged into a single, dense sound. It rolled across Ban Nong Kam like a cold mist, seeping into every home. No one could block it out. No one could pretend not to hear anymore. From that moment on, the crying was no longer a phenomenon. It became an accusation.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Confession. Mrs. Sang's death did not erupt into chaos. Yet its aftershock rippled through Ban Nong Kam like a slow, spreading fracture. She was found at dawn, hanging from a beam behind her old kitchen, where she had lived alone for more than 10 years since her husband's death. Her face was darkened, her tongue protruding, her eyes wide open, as if she were still staring at something no one else could see. Clutched in her hand was a crumpled piece of paper, folded and unfolded countless times. No one dared to open it right away. Only when the village head and Prasid arrived was the paper spread out on the old wooden table. The handwriting was uneven and shaking, ink smeared in places by tears. Mrs. Sang confessed. She wrote that many years earlier, on a rainy night much like the ones haunting the village now, she had helped a woman give birth in secret. The baby was born alive, weak, crying softly, but instead of being lifted into waiting arms, it was placed on the cold ground. The mother was too terrified to look, and Mrs. Sang chose silence. She did not bury the child with her own hands. But she did not stop it either. The sound of that baby's crying followed me for years. The letter read, but I pretended not to hear it. I believed that if I lived long enough, everything would eventually be forgotten. Nok's hands trembled as she read the final line. It was not just one child. After Mrs. Sang's death, the crying changed. It no longer wandered aimlessly. It became specific. Those who had been directly or indirectly involved began to suffer sudden misfortune. Some fell violently ill, burning with fever, calling out the names of children who had never existed. Others lost their sanity for moments at a time, standing in the village yard at night, rocking empty air and humming lullabies in broken voices. One man confessed that he had personally buried a fetus after forcing his daughter to abort it. Another collapsed in tears, claiming he saw a child standing beside his bed, its face smeared with dirt, asking why no one had come to look for it. Confessions surfaced in fragments, piece by piece, like flesh being stripped from bone. Prasit said the infant spirits were forcing people to confront what they had done. There was no hiding anymore, no one left untouched. Nock realized this was no longer a story about ghosts. It was a story about lives erased from memory, and memory fighting back. That night, the crying was heard in Mrs. Sang's house one last time. There were no sobs, no pleas, only a deep, lingering sound, like the exhale of many children breathing out together. And Nock understood. They no longer wanted apologies. Chapter 10. The Blood Moon Night. The full moon arrived beneath a suffocating sky. Even before night fell, Ban Nong Kam felt wrong. The clouds hung low and heavy, tinted with a dull red hue, as if the sky itself were bruised. The sun sank slowly, distorted and swollen, like a wound that refused to close. No one needed to say it aloud. Everyone knew something would happen tonight. When the moon rose, the village fell silent. The moon was not bright or white. It was dark red, murky, as though coated in dried blood. Its light did not illuminate the land, it thickened the darkness instead, pressing it down upon the village. Dogs that once howled at night whimpered and crawled beneath houses, trembling. The crying began the moment the moon reached its peak. It was no longer solitary, no longer scattered. Dozens, hundreds, of infant cries overlapped, merging into a single, heavy sound that crushed the chest of anyone who heard it. It no longer sounded like crying at all, but like a wave of pain, rolling relentlessly through the village. The ground in the cemetery began to shake. Thin cracks split the earth, branching like veins across skin. From within them rose a bitter cold, carrying the stench of old soil and sour milk. Nock stood at the edge of the village, unable to move, watching gravestones tilt as if pulled from below. Then came the sound of earth breaking. One grave collapsed inward, revealing a yawning darkness. From within it, a tiny arm emerged, skin shriveled, coated in mud, grasping blindly at the air. Then another arm appeared. They were not reaching to attack. They were reaching to cling. The crying shifted. Broken syllables emerged within it, distorted fragments of speech, like children learning to talk. Cold, dark, where's mother? The words were not loud, yet they pierced directly into the minds of those who heard them. People collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads, sobbing uncontrollably. Prasit knelt in the village square, desperately attempting a binding rite, but the bronze bell would not ring, and the talismans scorched the moment they touched the ground. His hands shook as he realized the truth. This was no uprising. These spirits were not driven by hatred. They were simply present, exposing a suffering that had been buried too long. As the moon's color slowly faded, the crying softened, but did not vanish. The ground stilled. The tiny arms withdrew, leaving the earth cracked and scarred. The blood moon night ended. But everyone understood that Ban Nong Kam would never return to what it once was. Because the children beneath the soil had been seen. And once they had been seen, they would never allow themselves to be buried again.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. Hands Beneath the Soil. After the blood moon night, Ban Nong Kam no longer truly slept. People lay down only from exhaustion, not rest. No one dared turn the lights off completely. The weak yellow bulbs hanging from rafters cast just enough glow to reveal hollow faces and darkened eyes, as if the entire village had aged decades overnight. By the first morning, small bulges appeared in the ground outside several homes. They did not resemble anthills or rain-softened soil. Each mound was round and deliberate, clustered as though something beneath the earth had pressed its palms upward and held them there for a long time. When someone tried to level one with a hoe, the soil collapsed inward, revealing a pocket of cold emptiness below, no deeper than an arm's length. No one dared dig further. By midday, a child ran home screaming, swearing that a hand had reached up from the playground, grabbing his ankle. When the adults rushed over, they found only a faint drag mark in the dirt and pale impressions like small fingers burned into the child's skin, so cold they did not warm even under the noon sun. The crying no longer arrived as sound alone. It became a sensation. A heavy pressure pressed against the ears, as if cotton had been stuffed inside. A sudden, sourceless sorrow welled up, causing people to burst into tears without knowing why. Some paused mid-meal, staring into their bowls, whispering that they could hear a baby crying inside their stomach. Nock witnessed these changes firsthand. Patients at the clinic no longer complained of physical pain. They spoke of emptiness, of a hollow cold, as if something essential were missing from within them. One young woman clutched her abdomen and whispered that small hands were touching her from the inside, tapping gently, asking to be let out. When night fell, the phenomenon became unmistakable. At the edge of the former cemetery, tiny hands began to surface from the soil, not all at once. Not violently. They appeared and withdrew, as if testing the response of the living. Some showed only a few fingers. Others rose to the wrist, trembling, clumps of earth falling away. They did not attack. They searched. Prasit said the infant spirits did not know how to walk, did not know where to go. They only reached toward warmth, toward memory, toward the living. Each hand was a wordless question. Why am I here? One man could no longer bear the pressure. He ran into the cemetery in the middle of the night, screaming that he was ready to give everything back. By morning, he was found kneeling in the dirt, both hands pressed into a deep hollow, as though holding invisible hands. His body was cold and rigid, his expression eerily peaceful. Standing in the doorway of the clinic, Nock heard the crying again, very faint now, as if coming from deep underground, blending with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. In that moment, she understood. The hands would not stop reaching. Not until someone dared face the final truth. That was already being pulled toward the surface. Chapter 12. The Failed Deliverance Rite. There was no other choice left. As the small hands continued to surface from the soil, as the crying ceased to be a sound and became a weight crushing every chest in the village. The village head finally agreed to let Prasit perform the largest deliverance rite Ban Nong Kham had ever known. It was meant not only to release spirits, but to acknowledge the things the village had tried so desperately to forget. The ritual was held at the edge of the Nameless cemetery, on a night with no moon. Villagers were told to bring incense, candles, and anything that had once belonged to a child, old clothes, chipped toys, faded swaddling cloths. These items were placed in a wide circle around a shallow pit, dug just deep enough to expose the dark soil beneath. Prasit said that earth like this had gone too long without being named. When the ritual began, the air grew thick. The bronze bell rang slowly, heavily, each toll striking straight into the chest. Prasit chanted ancient words, his hoarse voice steady as he called out to the nameless spirits. With every invocation, the crying answered from beneath the ground, not angry, not defiant, only exhausted, unbearably weary. Nock stood among the villagers, her hands trembling as she held a small, threadbare infant cloth someone had pressed into her palms. She did not know which child it had belonged to. Perhaps that was what made the moment unbearable. No one knew whom they were trying to send away. Prasit knelt and placed his hands on the earth, urging the spirits to leave, to release their pain. But the moment his palms touched the soil, it shuddered, not violently, but in a long, weak spasm. From the pit, the crying surged louder than ever. Not one voice. Many. The cries overlapped without merging, each carrying its own rhythm, its own grief, as if every child feared that if it fell silent, it would be forgotten once again. Some villagers collapsed, sobbing, calling out names that had never existed in any public memory. Then a voice spoke. It did not come from any mouth. If we leave, where will we go? Prasit froze. He had never heard infant spirits speak in words before. In that instant, he understood the terrible truth. This ritual had come too late. These spirits did not know what the other side was, because they had never truly lived in this one. The bronze bell slipped from Priscilla's hand and shattered on the ground. Every candle went out at once. Though there was no wind, darkness poured in, thick and cold. The crying did not disappear, it changed, becoming hollow and bottomless, like a pit with no end. When light was finally restored, Priscilla was still kneeling at the edge of the pit, eyes wide open, his breathing shallow. He whispered, his voice nearly gone. "They don't need deliverance. They need acknowledgement." The ritual ended in silence. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. The deliverance had failed. And when prayer could no longer resolve what had been done, the debt would be collected another way.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The one Who heard the last cry. Sanchai returned to Ban Nong Kham on a gray afternoon, when the sky hung so low it felt as if it could be touched. No one was surprised to see him, though he had abandoned his night watch duties long ago. Sanchai had never truly left the village. People said he had spent the past months living in a small hut at the forest's edge, unable to sleep a full night because the crying had followed him. Sanchai said he heard it whenever he closed his eyes. It no longer came from the cemetery, nor from beneath the floor or the wind. The crying lived inside his head, steady and patient, like a child who knew that someone had finally chosen to listen. He was no longer afraid. Fear had been worn away by endless sleepless nights, leaving behind something heavier, guilt, thick and unresolved. "Someone has to stay," Sanchai told the village head. "Not to bind them, not to chase them away, but to listen." That night, Sanchai walked alone into the Nameless cemetery. He carried no flashlight, no talismans, only his old jacket and empty hands. He sat down at the very spot where he had first heard the crying years before. The cold earth seeped through his thin clothes, but he did not move. The crying rose almost immediately. It was not furious, not accusing. It was small and weak, exactly as it had been on that first rainy night. Then another cry joined it, and another, many cries layered together, yet this time they did not overwhelm him. Sanchai closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. "I hear you now," he whispered. "You are not forgotten." The ground around him trembled softly. No hands emerged, no soil broke apart, only the sensation that something very close had leaned against him, resting its head on his knee. Sanchai felt the cold, but it was no longer terrifying. It was the cold of a child needing to be held. He began to speak. Not prayers. Not apologies. He spoke of his night patrols, of rain and wind, of the small choices people made when they pretended not to see. He apologized for turning away all those years ago, for not taking one more step toward the cemetery. The crying slowly faded. Near dawn, Sanchai opened his eyes. The cemetery was unnaturally still. No mist, no wind, only a silence so deep it hurt. By morning, the villagers found Sanchai kneeling in the cemetery. He was dead. His posture was strange, arms slightly open, as though embracing something unseen. His face showed no terror, no pain. His lips curved faintly upward, as if he had finally heard something he needed to hear. From that night on, the crying was never heard again. But no one dared say the story was over. Chapter 14. The cemetery disappears. Sanchai's death did not bring panic to Ban Nong Kham. It brought something heavier, silence. A silence thick with understanding. No one needed to say it aloud. Everyone knew Sanchai had done what no one else could. He had stayed when everyone else turned away. 3 days later, the rain began. It was not the brief, violent rainstorms of the monsoon season, but a relentless downpour that fell day and night without pause. Water poured down from the rubber forests, swelling the narrow stream near the Nameless cemetery far beyond its banks. By the second night, muddy water began to spill into the burial ground. No one tried to stop it. Villagers stood at a distance, watching the dark water swallow the low mounds of earth, erode the fragile graves, and topple the rotting markers that no longer bore names. The flood was not violent, but persistent, as if it knew exactly what it had come to take. By the third dawn, most of the cemetery had collapsed inward, dissolving into thick, swirling mud. When the rain finally stopped, the cemetery was gone. Where cold earth and nameless graves had once been, There was now only a flat stretch of ground covered in fresh silt. No pits, no cracks, no trace of the hands that had reached up from below. It was as if the place had never existed, or as if it had been carefully erased. What unsettled the villagers most was this. Throughout the days of rain, no one heard the crying. Not in the wind. Not in their homes. Not in their sleep. The silence lasted so long it became frightening in its own right. Children slept peacefully. Livestock returned to their pens. The small footprints never appeared again. But Ban Nong Kham was no longer the same. People spoke more openly now. Stories that had once been buried were told aloud. Some villagers brought old toys to the edge of the land and buried them, not to hide them, but to remember. Others lit incense without asking for anything, standing still for a long time. One evening, Nok returned to the place where the cemetery had been. She stood there, staring at the empty ground, feeling hollow. There was no sense of being watched, no pressure, no crying in her ears. Yet she understood clearly. This silence was not an ending, it was acceptance. That night, for the first time in weeks, Nok slept without dreams. And Ban Nong Kham understood that some things do not disappear because they are erased, but because, at last, they are allowed to rest.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Lullaby in the Wind. Many years passed after the Nameless cemetery disappeared, and Ban Nong Kham slowly returned to an ordinary rhythm of life. Children born afterward grew up without the invisible fear that once haunted the village. They ran along the red dirt roads, laughing freely, unaware that beneath the ground they played on, there had once been a place the adults had feared to name. The empty land where the cemetery had been was soon covered in grass. No one built houses there. No one farmed it. There was no official prohibition, yet everyone understood instinctively. Some places are meant to remain empty. Nok left Ban Nong Kham 3 years later. Before she went, she returned to the old site one last time. She stood there for a long while, listening. There was no crying, no cold presence, only the wind moving through the grass, carrying the familiar scent of damp earth. For a brief moment, Nok felt as though someone stood very close, unseen, untouched, simply present. That night, as Nok slept in her old room, she heard a sound so faint she almost missed it. It was not crying. It was a lullaby. The sound was thin and distant, as if carried from far away by the wind. There were no clear words, only a slow, gentle rhythm, like an old voice rocking a child who had finally fallen asleep. Nok did not open her eyes. She was not afraid. For the first time since arriving in Ban Nong Kham, she felt a quiet peace settle in her chest. The next morning, she left the village. Even now, the elders of Ban Nong Kham say that on nights when the wind is strong, if one stands in the exact spot where the cemetery once lay, the lullaby can still be heard. No one hears the crying anymore. No one sees the small footprints. Only a deep, gentle sadness remains, like a memory absorbed into the earth. They tell one another. They did not disappear. They stopped crying because, at last, someone listened. And so, Ban Nong Kham no longer fears the darkness. But it never forgets that some cries, if ignored for too long, will never truly fade. The crying is gone now. The graves have vanished, and the land lies quiet beneath the wind. But some stories do not end when the sound fades. They linger, in the soil, in memory, in the things people choose not to say. Because the most frightening thing was never the crying itself. It was how long no one listened. And if you ever hear a lullaby carried by the wind, remember this. Some voices stop crying not because they're gone, but because, at last, they were heard.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.